Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Hat Historian. In this video, I will be talking about a hat that was traditionally worn to bed and has become associated with sleep: the nightcap. The nightcap is a soft hat, often made of wool or flannel, but sometimes silk or satin, that was traditionally part of sleepwear in many colder countries. It is usually a conical shape, topped with a tassel or pom-pom for men, and women have their own version, which took the form of a bonnet. In use for centuries, it is rarely actually worn nowadays, though it remains part of many cartoons and caricature representations of sleepwear, and a variant can still be used to protect certain styles of hair during the night. So why are these still so ingrained in cultural imagery? How long ago the nightcap was developed is not exactly known, as it is born out of a simple pragmatic necessity. Before central heating or insulation, the only way to warm a room or house was by having a fire going. But the fire had to be tended to, lest it went out, which it most often did, and so cold would set in. Even in higher-class noble households, which had servants to tend to the fires, medieval open hearths were notoriously inefficient, not heating much beyond the area immediately around it, and thus even a king's chambers could get chilly. This was particularly true in northern European climates, whose cold, damp winter nights could be deadly to those who were not properly protected. Furthermore, sleepwear was different from what we can now imagine it to be. For most of history, there was no real dedicated sleepwear, be it for men or for women. At most, people might wear a spare shirt or shift, but in medieval times, and in many cases all the way to the 16th century, the vast majority of people just slept naked. Taboos around nudity were not the ones we now have, particularly amongst the lower classes, so it was not considered anything more than a practical decision, and many considered it healthier to be uncovered for sleep, as certain people thought it allowed bad airs to be vented through the skin at night. Many tales relate various people wearing garments to bed in a tone that all but implies it was an unusual thing. As 14th century man Arnaud Sierre, who had to share a bed, a common occurrence in the day, with a man named Belly Bust, whom he mentioned removed his shirt, but particularly notes he kept his underpants on. A tale of Lancelot further notes that the knight, made to share a bed with a woman when he loves another, keeps his shirt on to signify an obvious sign of his chastity. Thus, nudity appears to have been the norm for sleeping for most people. For warmth, they obviously relied on blankets, fur for the richer, or rough wool for poorer classes, but this did leave the head outside in the cold air of preheating dwellings, and so most of the time, the only garment a person would wear while sleeping was a cap that covered the head and ears. Eventually, fashions and norms changed to where sleepwear became more common, and many times for the upper classes, more elaborate. But a new development made the use of a nightcap even more necessary in the 18th century: the fashion of wearing wigs. Wigs were made into a whole variety of style, from various materials, but really rose into fashion throughout the century, where any respectable upper-class man and woman was expected to wear one. And in order to be more comfortable, oftentimes people would shave or cut short their own hair underneath, in order for the wig to fit better and be less hot. However, at night, when the wig was removed, that meant that the person's head was uncovered, and thus needed something to protect it, as heating hadn't much improved for most, despite the apparent opulence of the chateaux and manors. These sometimes became elaborately decorated, made of silk or other fine materials. It also allowed people, after retiring from social engagement, to cover their shaved heads when they no longer wore their wigs, to appear more put together. Other times, people would use a sort of turban wrapped around their heads as an alternative, though the simple cap was more popular. Outside Northern Europe, there are other cultures that would use form of head covering at nights, either for warmth or to protect their hair. In the Middle East, where people wore keffirs for centuries, the same cloth could be used to wrap around the head for comfort and warmth at night, as, despite the image one can have of the region being very hot, the desert can actually get quite cold at night. Similarly, in Africa, head wraps could be worn in order to protect the head from the cold, though these did not have the same shape as the stereotypical nightcap one associates with sleepwear, but the need to keep one's head warm at night is fairly universal throughout cultures. The long, pointed, tasseled nightcap, as we now picture it, truly emerged in the 19th century, often made extra long so that the end could potentially be used as a kind of extra scarf. Such hats can be readily seen in depictions of Ebenezer Scrooge from the famous story A Christmas Carol, who is often shown wearing one throughout his adventures with the ghosts, as he is supposed to have been taken from his bed. As the custom of wigs or tall hairstyles passed for women, they nonetheless continued to wear sleeping bonnets, as it would protect their hair from damage, preserve the curl style popular at the time, and of course continue to keep the head warm. Nightcaps became associated with a new kind of garment that was brought back from India, pajamas. Inspired by traditional Persian and Indian clothes, who also contributed the name, pajamas became fashionable, first as a form of loungewear, before becoming, in the Victorian period, a type of sleeping wear, replacing the nightshirts used up until then. Nightcaps continued to be part of these outfits, sometimes coordinated with them as part of a set. A material that became increasingly popular in the late 19th century was satin, which was less rough on the hair and would allow it to move freely against the material, thus reducing the need to comb one's hair in the morning. Many considered single satin cap to be a cheaper alternative to many satin pillowcases, and served a similar purpose. I should note that the nightcap should not be confused with the smoking cap, which I talked about in my video on the fez, which was another tasseled hat, often made of velvet, designed to protect the hair from the smell of tobacco smoke, which was popular in the Victorian era as well. While still practical, the nightcap started to be seen as old-fashioned by the turn of the 20th century. Not coincidentally, it is also around this time that heating started to become more efficient in people's homes, negating the need for this article of warmth at night. While stoves or furnaces had been spreading throughout the 19th century, new concepts of central heating began to become prevalent in cold climates, with radiators spreading heat more evenly throughout houses. However, many people still continued to wear caps at night, especially in poorer areas, as all houses did not yet have access to this new heating method. During World War I, a nightcap was included in the standard kit for French soldiers going to the front, as they wanted to be able to keep warm wherever they slept. But this generation was the last to commonly wear nightcaps, at least where men are concerned. Women would sometimes continue to wear a form of bonnet, occasionally with curlers underneath, in order to style their hair and protect it from getting deformed by sleeping, though this too increasingly began to be seen as old-fashioned as the century went on. With its principal use rendered moot by better heated and insulated homes, the nightcap faded into history, though it still remains in certain specific images and circumstances. You'll be hard-pressed to find someone wearing a traditional pointed nightcap today on a regular basis, though of course there are still a handful who do. However, because it is ingrained in cultural imagery, many cartoons or comic characters will be depicted as wearing one at night, as well as caricatures of someone in sleepwear, as it is a handy indicator of someone being ready for sleep when a simple depiction of pajamas might not indicate it clearly enough. The enduring image of Scrooge in his nightcap shirt have also helped maintain that image of sleepwear amongst older men into our times, even if very few people actually dress that way for sleep. The nightcap adds an exaggerated, cartoonish element to sleepwear that clearly telegraphs its purpose, and shows that the character being ready for sleep is the focal point, rather than simply being dressed in regular sleepwear, where other plot elements might be the focus. However, there are still some people who wear head coverings at night, not for warmth, but for the other reasons stated earlier, to protect potentially delicate hairstyles. This is particularly true for people of African descent whose hair, I'm told, is more prone to breakage, and whose hairstyles sometimes require protection. Many of them wear a silk or satin bonnet at night in order to help protect their hair, though it bears little resemblance to the stereotypical pointed nightcap. Some are fairly tight on the head, especially for men, while others are reminiscent of bonnets women used to wear. Some people from other ethnicities who have especially curly hair will, on occasion, do the same. Finally, its general spirit is still seen with campers, who will often wear a knit or fleece cap when in a sleeping bag, for the same reason as their medieval predecessors, as the head is the only part not covered by the bag, and thus must be kept warm. While not worn much anymore, other than in specific circumstances, the nightcap has an enduring place in our image of sleepwear. Shorthand for someone seeking a good night of rest, it continues to appear in popular culture long after the practical reasons for its use have disappeared. And honestly, it is kind of comfy and cozy. So I hope once again that you found this video interesting and will join me again soon for another hat. Until then, I tip my hat to you. Oh.